Nick, tell us what you know about the impact these strikes are having on ISIS positions.
Well, for the first time tonight, we're hearing from activists inside that city, Raqqa, slaughtered silently. We can't corroborate their information, but they're normally quite reliable. They're saying that actually in the last hours, 2 strikes have occurred, one against a fuel truck, one against a brick factory, and the one against the fuel truck seems to have caused the first civilian death. 7 civilian deaths, 8 injuries. The first since they've reported since the uptick in strikes began when the French launched their first onslaught 3 nights ago. We don't have a full readout for the numbers of blasts that are hitting the city at this stage, but there do appear to be a number. The French have been saying how it is command centres, recruitment centres, training camps they're particularly going after. Many questions, Hala, about how many targets have suddenly become available, viable in the past 72 hours, given the US have been flying over that city for a protracted period of time. ISIS, too, according to activists, have clamped down on the use of the internet in their city. They've done that before, but I think they are concerned potentially and information about targeting being given away at this stage. And you mentioned yourself the idea of people trying to leave that city. Very tough to do at the best of times. ISIS have a tight grip on who goes in and out, and the traffic to the east, possible, but more complicated, particularly towards Mosul, because the Peshmerga have seized Sinjar and the route that runs between Raqqa and Mosul all the way through it. We're there ourselves. They've dug huge trenches across it in multiple places, put earth berms in the way. So getting out of Raqqa could be tough, and there are increasing fears for the civilians in there. They're trapped in this, and as we're also hearing too, Hala, where we are inside of Syria, the debate about what comes next. There's increased air power being used, but the Kurds are massing to the north of that city, despite the fact they don't really have the weapons, despite the fact they don't seem to have the numbers at this stage. Talk is increasingly common here about them potentially moving against Raqqa on the ground. You might think it's far-fetched, but it's gaining greater currency here, Hala.
How much, I mean, you're talking about these strikes, and of course there are also concerns about civilians trapped inside of that city, Raqqa, the Syrian self-proclaimed capital of Daesh. But how much would it be weakening them from the air at this stage? Is there any way to measure that?
Not really, in all honesty. We are reliant upon the breakdown we're given by the French, at times the Russians too, the coalition, who again say they've been hitting targets around Raqqa in their last press release over the last 24 hours, and potentially even to the Syrian regime's choice of targets as well. The activists Raqqa slaughtered silently say, look, you know, we see occasionally buildings being hit more than once. Sometimes the target is a large building that requires to be hit more than once. Sometimes ISIS move between buildings to avoid airstrikes. US officials today trying to explain this massive glut of targets that have suddenly become available since the French started bombing. They say, well, look, things pop up, they get vetted, there are targets of opportunity. It isn't simply a linear process. You can have a cluster at some point that become available. But the question really is this a political message? And if it is, are places being hit that have been hit before, or are civilians being put at risk? So obviously the French and the coalition have tight rules of engagement. There are concerns amongst US officials. The Russians are potentially more laxed about whether or not civilians get caught in the blast. They would deny that, but that is the real fear now. Raqqa is the focus of the bombing campaign, and there are still people living inside it who don't work or support ISIS.